You've made a great choice by joining us for this webinar. We are so happy to be sharing intel and information for you about how to approach your local government. We're even going to have a little flavor of national government approaching too. So in a moment, I'll introduce you to the team and let them tell themselves. They'll tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we'll dig into this conversation. But first, we'd love to start with a story from the street about approaching local government. Greg, let us know about your experiences with this.
Thanks, Maureen, and welcome, everyone. So when I first started in the cannabis industry, a few weeks into my first job, my boss asked me to go speak in front of a local regulatory body here on some proposed regulatory changes. And I was so nervous. I was practicing what I was going to say over and over again. And as I approached that podium, I was shaking. I got up there, felt like I word vomited out the changes I wanted to see. I was certainly reassured to see that the people sitting on the other side of the podium, the government officials, were really appeared to be listening. I sat down very nervous. My coworker told me I did a great job. I felt a little bit better and never thought anything would come of it. Then when the updated regulations came out, I saw that they had listened to me and that they had integrated those changes in to ultimately make a better regulatory scheme for everyone. My name is Greg Huffaker, and I'm now the Director of Client Operations at Canna Advisors. In this role, I've been able to talk to government officials at state and local levels across the whole country, and more importantly, help hundreds of clients do the same.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. We're glad you're with us. And also sharing information about how to powerfully approach local government, Yvette McDowell. Yvette?
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yvette McDowell of McDowell and Associates. And just a little bit on my background, I was with municipal government at the city of Pasadena, California, for just shy of 3 decades, 30 years. I started in city government in 1981. And as I go around, I find that a lot of people weren't even born in 1981. So I've been there for a long time. I'm retired now. I started there as a firefighter paramedic for half of my career. In the second half, I retired as an assistant city prosecutor. So that put me in touch with all local government officials, and I've had lots of interaction with them. So I'm excited to be here today and share some value with you. So thank you, Maureen.
Thanks, Yvette. Yeah, absolutely. And Michelle is with the National Cannabis Industry Association. Michelle?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you all today and to participate in this wonderful webinar. A little bit about myself. I have been here at NCIA for going on 5 years now, and I have the privilege to represent all of NCIA's nearly 2,000 members here in Washington, D.C. and on Capitol Hill. And my job is really to talk to staff and talk to members of Congress, to educate them, and to really raise the visibility of some of the issues that the cannabis industry is facing, like banking and 280E, and also talk about other issues like comprehensive legislation and social equity and justice. So I'm happy to be here with you all today. Even though what we're talking about today is about how to approach your local government, many of these principles will still apply to talking to your national government. And so I hope that you all find this helpful, and I look forward to talking to you more about how you can get involved at the national level.
My name's Maureen McNamara. I'll be your moderator or host of today's webinar. Training has been my focus since the 1900s for a couple decades, and compliance-focused training is one of the things that we've been bringing to the cannabis industry since late 2013 and then early 2014. And it's been our pleasure to be a member of NCIA for 5 years now and collaborating to provide training. Also, Greg, Yvette, and myself are members of the State Regulation Committee. NCIA is really committed to advocacy, education, and community. And we've got committees that focus on specific elements that are important to members of the National Cannabis Industry Association. And it is our delight to bring you this webinar today. I've been the chairperson this year and co-chair last year, and look forward to sharing intel about how we can be influential and making sure regulations make sense in your neck of the woods. So let's dig into some details here. This is our outline. This is what we'll be talking about today: how to know who your authorities are, and then the right ways to be influential in our approaches, and then our encouragement for next steps. But we'd love to know, this is your chance if you're with us live to open up your chat feature and let us know if you've attended city council or local meetings. If you're joining us via the recording, you can just take some side notes here or mentally send us images. But go ahead and find your chat feature. Let us know, have you been to council meetings? Yes. How many have you been to? If you're a first timer, not yet attended, let us know as well. Okay, Tina, you're a pro at going to those city council meetings. Excellent. Well, it's important. Yeah, Denise, you've been to several. Okay, Dawn, you're going to many of them. Nice. Tafia, both local and state. All right, we've got a couple fresh folks as well. Some first timers. Well, we wanted to know how many first timers we have versus how many pros we have. So just know that the information we're going to share with you is relevant for if you're brand new or if you're a little bit of a veteran, so novice or expert, that we want this information to be of service to you. And whether regulation has come to your community or legalization has come to your community and how to influence that, or if you're currently in a community in a state where regulation does exist, how to influence it for the better. Great. So keep that chat window open. We'll be asking you a couple more questions, and this is where you can communicate your questions to us. Okay, so Greg, tell us, how do we start all this?
Thanks, Maureen. So, and do you want to go? There we go. So if this is the first time you're entering the cannabis space, or if you're an experienced person looking to expand your reach, or even just get to know your existing people better, it all starts with this question of, where do I begin? What's really the first step, and can seem like a daunting approach. Next slide, please, Maureen. So this first hurdle we're going to have to tackle is, where exactly is your property? What is that local government that you are going to be needing to interact with? If it's a city, it's probably a city council and a mayor. And if it's a county, it's probably a board of supervisors. Now, Yvette, can you tell us really where you can get this info to cross this first hurdle and others?
Absolutely. Thanks, Greg. You can start by reaching out to your city clerk's office in your jurisdiction to find out first whether or not you have a city council, or again, if you have a board of directors, board of supervisors. The people there that you talk to, they are very knowledgeable. They will guide you in the right direction. So that would be the first step, is start with City Hall. And also, as you're doing that, you want to find out their position on cannabis. Are they regulating in that respective jurisdiction? Are they thinking about it? Have they had any hearings on that? If they have hearings, you can find out the stance. Also, try and get the name of a contact person who has been delegated to oversee cannabis operations in that jurisdiction. So you can find out as much as you can, and I encourage you to ask questions, ask lots of questions. That's what they're there for, to answer you, and you can find out a lot of information and save yourself a lot of time and headache. So next slide. Oh,
Yvette, could you tell us, when you think about how we connect with our city officials, do you see the real benefit of that being a phone call versus online research?
Absolutely. The reason a phone call is preferable in this instance is because you want to start to build rapport. And there is nothing like the human touch, the human voice, the connection to start building that rapport, because you will find that people you connect with at City Hall, City Clerk's office can become some of your best friends. So I would suggest a phone call.
Great. Okay, so now that we are live in the room with our local officials, what's our protocol here?
Well, the one thing that you want to do when you're in that council chamber, there is protocol. Keep in mind that you can't just walk up to council persons and start a conversation most times. There is going to be a separation. It might be a little pony wall that's set up, and behind that pony wall is designated for the audience. You will see the area where all the chairs where the council members sit, and if you see them standing there and you're able to get their attention, they may come over and speak with you. They may motion you to come speak with them, but don't just take it upon your own to go beyond the boundaries. There's usually a sergeant of arms that's there to prevent disorderly conduct or from you going beyond the boundaries. So just follow the protocol. If you're going to be a speaker, there's usually a speaker card that you will have to fill out, and they typically give you 1 minute, sometimes 2 minutes to speak at a podium. When you go to that podium, there's usually little lights. There might be a green, yellow, and red light. And your green is going to be activated when you start. Your yellow light will caution you that your time is almost up. And when that red light hits, that means stop, because they will shut your microphone off.
Oh, it's very timed and specific. Yes, certainly I've been there as well. And Yvette, when you think about being really prepared to attend these council meetings, city meetings, town meetings, etc., when we do the research to understand what people's positions are or concerns, is that again from those phone calls? Is that online? Is it by attending the meetings as a silent observer until we're ready to powerfully contribute? What do you suggest?
It could be a combination, Maureen. You can find out a lot about a council member's positions. One of the things that I did, I would always make friends with the field reps. Every council person, board of directors, supervisors, they all have staff. And if you can talk with that staff person, that will give you some great insight into that politician's background, their likes, their dislikes, what they're supporting, things of that nature. They're going to be one of your best sources of information as well, because after all, they are the gatekeeper to the politician that you want to get to. They're the individuals who can get an appointment for you. They can move a calendar around. I mean, they really are the linchpin when you want to get to that council member. So make friends with them, talk with them. You know, let them know who you are. Find out what your council person is supporting, what their causes are, what's important to them, and act accordingly. You know, let's not regurgitate things all over them, but let's ask more questions and get answers so you can formulate what you want to talk about.
Great. And I think, Michelle, I'm going to ask you to jump in just a moment. But before that, one of the things we've talked about is when we go to a council chambers or a city town meeting for the very first time, and it's our hot topic and we're passionate about it, one of the things we'd encourage you is to go to a meeting where perhaps cannabis isn't on the agenda, but to get familiar with how it all works. Be there as an observer a time or two so that you can most powerfully be a contribution when the topic is of relevance to us. Takes off a little pressure, there's a little bit more familiarity. So, Michelle, talk to us. If we are live at these meetings, we've done our homework, we know what people's positions are, we understand what their concerns are about cannabis. What do we need to know? Anything else or advice you have for us?
Sure. One of the pieces of advice that I would have, whether you're in person or you're making a phone call or you're even just sending an email, is to always know your audience. For me, working with Congress, you know, I look at a member of Congress and go, okay, what state are they from, right? Are they from an adult use state? Are they from a medical cannabis state? Does their state have no cannabis related program at all? That informs the way that I'm going to speak speak to that member or their staff a lot, because you don't want to go in there and, shoot for the moon when you need to make sure that you make people feel safe and sort of give them baby steps before you do that. I also wanted to address a question that I saw over on our webinar chat from Richard, and he asked about the effectiveness of in-person versus email correspondence. And I would just say that both of those, and in addition to that, phone calls are another option, but all of those modes of communication are incredibly important, and they all serve a different purpose, right? So going in person is very important to, be a human being, essentially, not just behind a screen, to make that connection, to sit there face to face, and try to make a connection with that person. And so it is important to have that if possible. But that being said, a phone call or an email can also work really well, but you need to remember when we're doing that follow-up is really, really important. Here on Capitol Hill, when I'm here in DC, we are talking to staffers who have huge portfolios that handle issues like transportation, for instance, and that is a lot of work. And we have to remember that cannabis is just one small issue to some of these staffers or members, whoever they may be. And so we need to remember that it is our job as educators of this industry to make sure that we're following up. And again, whether that's in a phone call or in email or whatever, it's really, really important. And I really want to echo what Yvette just said about forming really good relationships with staff. I cannot reiterate how incredibly important that is. She is completely spot on when she said that they are the gatekeeper. We'll talk about how to get involved in your federal politics and our event that's coming up, our annual lobby days here soon, and how people can get involved with that. But it's so funny when every year, this will be, I think, my 5th year planning it, every year people go to me, Michelle, why didn't you schedule me to sit down with this member of Congress or that member of Congress? And while I understand that they want to sit down with the member, I have to remind them that it's really actually sometimes more important to sit down with the staffer who's actually sitting there and writing the memos and writing the policy, and again, is that gatekeeper.
Awesome. Thank you. And I would like us all to there's a key wisdom drop Michelle just said, which is, yes, we want to influence. And the best way to do that is by being an educator. Now, Greg, tell us, how do we actually find or approach our local government?
Absolutely.
Or the specific people?
So when we are at these city council meetings, and in a minute we're going to talk, or board of supervisors, of course, and in a minute we're going to talk about some other community events, you want to be introducing yourself to as many different people as possible. Certainly proponents, both in the government and other members of the cannabis industry, or people interested in getting into the industry, or just passionate advocates of the industry. You're going to want to meet those people and form relationships with them so that you can come to a consensus, you can share resources and ideas, and generally just work together. It's also really important to introduce yourself to those opponents. Some of this might be when you're at one of those meetings in which cannabis is a topic, or you might be at an unrelated event, shaking hands with people and learning quickly that some of them are opposed. It is very important to find out why someone is opposed and really be there to listen to their concerns. Ask questions. You want to be prepared to educate with factual, correct information, especially for those government officials. But it's crucial that if someone is opposed, that you understand where they're coming from and that they feel heard by you. Next slide, please. Now, when you're talking to those local government people specifically, we definitely, as we just discussed, want to be making those connections with those field reps, those other staff members, those people that are really there in their role to be interacting with you. Those people can help give you insight into the positions of your local government officials. They might be able to tell you, I'm not quite sure, or this one's undecided. You're also going to hear in city council meetings and other community events what their feelings are on it. Now, you want to be a member of the community. So it's important that you are also learning what other important interests you may share with those government officials. We're going to hear some stories in a minute about how those kind of things can pay off. But ultimately, you want to show that you're not a single issue person. Everyone here on this webinar, I'm sure, has a variety of interests that expand beyond cannabis, and many of those are going to be shared with both proponents and opponents, both in and outside of your local government. Ultimately, for all of these people, you want to become a resource for education around cannabis, and someone who just seems open to listening and generally interested in being part of your community. Now, Maureen, I think you have a great question for our audience here.
We do. We definitely want to hear from everyone. If you're with us live right now, go ahead back to your keyboard and open up that chat window. We're going to share some good intel on where you can connect with local officials outside of the council chambers, but we'd love to hear from you first. Where have you created opportunities to cross paths with your local officials? We love a good creative, engineered, well, look at this, we're at the same meeting. It's my pleasure to say hello to you, or at the same conference. So give us some intel, share your secrets. Where do you meet your local officials? And while you're chatting that in, Greg, give us one example of a good place to create those connecting opportunities.
Well, I've certainly been humored by stories of someone who desperately tried to get to a mayor and found him sitting next to them at a bar.
Okay, apparently we got to go back to drinking alcohol. Just kidding. You can get yourself soda there. Harry, yeah. I gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. At the Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, it's always a good one. School events, association meetings, networking events. You're right, Tafia. The company co-working space. I love that, Denise. Having them come in. Richard, absolutely. Being in good communication with the fire marshal. Favorite restaurant, Susan, you know where to spy people. I love it. Absolutely, Tina. Going to those industry conferences can be really helpful as well. And when I do that, I always look at where the cannabis officials or representatives will be speaking, and I make sure I'm in the room and I introduce myself before or after those events. All right. Well, you're welcome to keep popping in some notes, but let's dig into some more details. And Greg, where else do you find that connecting with city officials can be of service?
So I love the list that our participants submitted. A few great ones that can be forward-looking and planned out are stuff around local libraries having events, perhaps opening a new wing, a renovation of a playground can be a great opportunity. Other things, you know, might get a heads up from those field reps you're talking to. If you're establishing connections with them and saying, you know, just let me know what events they would like people at. It is very important to these local government officials to be out and participating in that community. Another great resource to find what those upcoming events are can be the website itself. And as Yvette said, you can always call up the clerk and just ask what upcoming events are going on in the community that people will probably be attending. So there's, you know, yet again, those resources are there for you. And ultimately, we don't necessarily want to just be at these events trying to get FaceTime to talk about cannabis. We want to be involved again in the whole community. Next slide, please. So we see these issues, for example, like I've had a client who was very interested in helping out at the local homeless shelters. It has nothing to do with his passion for cannabis or wanting to be a businessman, but everything to do with being a good community member and seeing a real need in his community for assistance there. It's great if you're able to interact with a local official there. It's also great to help build a story around that place, particularly if you don't live in the community that you would like to be setting up a cannabis business in, expanding that cannabis business, or maybe you have an existing one that always can use maintenance and improvement of the connections with the city. Now, Maureen, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, what's really important here, Greg, is that, of course, we're interested in persuading and influencing reasonable, responsible cannabis regulations for existing states that have legalization, or influencing, you know, new legalization for our not yet states. But also those other issues, what I always want people to keep in mind is to be super authentic with this, right? You're not going to join a softball team because you're hoping to play the other council members or city clerks when, you know, softball's not your game and you're going to get hit on the noggin. But if one of the core values for your business is community minded and working at the homeless shelters, if that's a connection or a shared value that you have with proponents or opponents, then connecting with things that genuinely align and support your company's vision and values can be really essential.
Absolutely. Okay, so we want to powerfully influence people. And often that can be by being curious, by listening to people's thoughts and concerns, and by following up with questions to what they have to say. Now, Michelle, I know you spend a lot of time with a precious small amount of minutes with important people. Do you have some ideas for our audience here on what best to focus on when given that opportunity?
Sure. I just think it's very important that we focus on the issue at hand here. And right now, what we're obviously talking about is cannabis and its regulation. You know, for myself, working with representatives on Capitol Hill, you know, like we mentioned earlier in the webinar, we all have our own personal feelings, and we live in such politically polarizing times that it is just so important to remember that when you're talking to somebody that you focus again on the issue at hand, which is cannabis. You know, I meet with a lot of offices who I disagree with some of their policies in such a way that it could just make me want to shake them and yell at them. But that is not my job. I am there to, again, be an educator and a facilitator for them. And it's important too to remember, you know, this is their stance on this, but why? How do I connect with people? And so it's just always important to sort of keep your eye on the prize and make sure that you're focusing again on what's at hand and not get off topic.
Great. And even though you might be really fired up and there's steam coming out of your head, what we say, this is about winning friends and influencing people, is really build relationships. Don't throw gas and, you know, burn down bridges. Even if someone is currently an opponent, it doesn't mean that is forever. So really have that human relations excellence, which is all about being a great listener.
Absolutely, Maureen. And I think something important to keep in mind is even if a conversation is not going well and you feel like you're not getting through, it's important to still try very hard to end on a good note, to not feel like you're burning that bridge, as Maureen said, but rather, even if it's a difficult, negative conversation and you're upset about it, that you end it in such a space that leaves them open to reapproaching you. So we now see here the vision we've covered, what it's going to look like when you're in these different spaces, the different kind of people that you're going to be talking with and really trying to listen to. When you get that opportunity to speak, you want to really know those local laws and regulations. You want to read them all and read them all multiple times. When you're reading them, you're going to come across things you don't understand. You're going to want to flag that stuff, research it, come back and not just reread that section, but reread the entire document to see what maybe that has influenced and changed over time. You want to be so comfortable with these documents that the people who drafted them, those government officials, will eventually feel like you are the person to ask objective, fact-based questions to get objective, fact-based answers. And you might be saying, well, that all sounds great, but how on earth am I going to find any of this stuff? You know, it's not that easy. Again, those local government officials are there for you to find that. The clerks, I promise you, want to talk to people on the phone and are happy to guide you to the right thing. As we talked about earlier, there's great ways, many ways to identify who exactly you need to be talking to, whether it's your city or county. And those people are going to point you towards those laws. Next slide, please. So it's not just the laws, of course, right? You need to expand your knowledge base in general. As you're learning the mood of the community members and local government officials in the city or county that we're focusing on here, you're going to understand where you need to improve your knowledge. For example, maybe you're hearing a lot of concerns about the fear of increased intoxicated driving and deaths from that. Well, then you're going to want to look up those studies. I think one just came out this week showing that there's no connection between those things. Printing off copies for people, reading them, digesting them, really understanding them, maybe even reaching out to the people who wrote those studies if you have questions. And in that base of people that are proponents, that are fellow business people in cannabis in your community, see where everyone seems to have questions. Educate yourself about those things. Maybe you're a processor in a community full of hydrocarbon extractors and nobody really seems to know much about CO2. Well, that's a great place for you to expand your knowledge, even if you don't plan on having a CO2 business. Now, Yvette, I know you also have some great ideas around the right ways and how to expand this knowledge.
Absolutely, Greg. Again, you cannot ask enough questions. That's one of the main things. We're very passionate, about the cannabis industry, and we want to, like I said, we want to just regurgitate everything we know. But the more questions you ask, the more you're going to find out about people and their likes and the different policies in your jurisdiction, what might change, what you would like to see changed. I mean, just asking questions. I can't stress that enough. That will get you a lot of answers. And it will also help you formulate your strategy as you move forward by having this information at hand. You will know who to approach, about what topics to approach, simply by asking questions and finding out information. So that's
Great.
what I would do.
Thank you, Yvette. And so as we look ahead, not only do we want to influence our local communities and towns and cities, but we may also want to influence state style. Yvette, tell us how we make that shift from local to our larger state community.
Absolutely. It's been said that all politics is local. And that is the absolute truth. When you think about the way you interact with your local politicians, when you take it to the state level, believe me, it is not that much different, because a lot of your local politicians move on to the state. So just think about it. If you are talking with your politician locally and the next thing you know, they've been elected to a state office, are you going to go and talk to them completely different because they're with the state? No, you continue with the same authenticity, the same way you approach local politicians. You're going to do the same thing. I know that's what I do when I'm talking locally, or I'm talking to someone at the state or up on the Hill in DC. These are people, and that's what we have to remember. They're people who are not as knowledgeable as you are about the industry, and as such, you are there to simply find out what it is they're missing, their positions, and be there to educate. But keep in mind, they are people, just like you.
Yeah, and that's a really key part. Now, we know that, of course, you all are likely here because you're members of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and Greg, Yvette, and I are members of the State Regulations Committee. But you can see here we've got a website for you, the cannabisindustry.org, to learn more about if there's some affiliates and cooperation with the local state chapters that can be of service to you to work together to influence things on the state level. And that's really important as well. Whether you are, or provincial level, for influencing your city or the state, or making sure regulations on either side that currently exist go in the right direction. All right, so let's jump into the next slide. And Yvette, when we think about that, what are the few steps to really begin?
Well, when you talk about courting your jurisdiction for support, you want to be aware of what's going on in your local jurisdiction for starters. You want to find out who the individual or individuals are that you need to speak with. That's going to be critical. And once you can do that, you start attending city council meetings. You call and you make an appointment. See if you can get in to talk with the field rep. That's who I would suggest first before even going to that council member, because again, the field rep is the gatekeeper, and they also have the pulse of what's important to that council member at that respective time. Cannabis could be the furthest thing from that individual's mind, And knowing that through the field rep will prevent you from making some critical mistakes. You might catch that person at the wrong time, and they don't want to hear from you at all. So that's how I would start courting my jurisdiction, showing up to functions, supporting things, just be that face that they are seeing on a regular basis, and let them get to know you and you get to know them.
Great. Thank you so much, Yvette. So for many of you, you let us know that you are perhaps new to this, and we're encouraging you to take those first steps. Get in that council chambers, even if cannabis is not on the agenda or not part of your local conversation yet. Familiarize yourself and start reaching out. So in a moment, we're going to jump into Q&A. So feel free to pop over to the chat feature and get your questions queued up. We've got plenty of time to interact with you and your questions in the chat feature. So, Michelle, now that we've spoken about our local way to influence and state influencing as well, talk to us about what's happening next month.
Sure. So next month, NCIA will be hosting our 9th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days. And maybe some of you on our webinar today have participated. I know some of our panelists absolutely have. But our annual Lobby Days is our greatest opportunity for NCIA members to come to DC and tell their stories. Again, as we've talked about in this webinar, we can't stress enough to you about how important it is to, again, be involved and get those stories out there. You would be shocked to know how many members of Congress didn't know that there was a banking issue with the cannabis industry until recently, and how many of them didn't know that 280E is a problem. And that's why it's our job to come here and tell them not only that these issues exist, but how they actually work out in practice. And so for our lobby days, what we do is we have about 250 to 300 of our members out here. It's important to note that this is the only event that NCIA does that is only open to our members. So if you're not a member, we hope that you will still consider joining us. But we have about 250 to 300 of our members descend upon DC. We make it incredibly easy for you. We schedule all of your meetings. We put you with a team to kind of go around the hill with all day. It's a really great bonding experience and a really wonderful way to meet high-level members of the industry because it is sort of an exclusive event. This year, we're doing something a little different. We will be having a VIP day on the first day, May 21st. Our VIP day is only open to members of NCIA's Leadership Circle. And if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to our website there on the bottom of the screen. In addition to our VIP day, we will just be, again, having our regular lobby days on the 22nd and 23rd. Those will include things like a breakfast training. So don't worry if you've never lobbied before. We also host webinars. Our attendees will hear from Maureen and myself here in the next month again to talk about the event and some of the do's and don'ts and some other tips about lobbying that we didn't touch on here today. And then after that, we will go and do over 200 or possibly even more than 300 meetings on the Hill. And so your group can expect to do probably about 4 to 5 meetings throughout the day. We have great software. There's an app on your phone to keep you on schedule and make sure that you have all the documents that you need. But again, you can check out our website there at the bottom of the screen to learn more. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you in DC next month.
Great. And I just want to add, for anyone that's never lobbied, this can happen state style as well. Lobby days locally can happen. And something Michelle said that I just want to highlight, the first time I lobbied, I was like, wait, I'm not a lobbyist. I don't know how. What do I do? But in the most simple of ways, this is you telling your story or sharing why doing cannabis business is a challenge and solutions for it. So really, if you can talk about what you do and you've got a story about how you do what you do, you're ready to be part of this, state style or locally. Now, there's a couple events coming up that NCIA is going to be hosting, and we'd love for you to come to these and consider these as well. They're a really great way to deepen your learning and possibly even connect with officials and influencers. We'd love to hear your questions. So feel free to keep popping in those questions. We've already got a couple. And one from early on, Sherry, I know that with Canada having ended prohibition, next up is how to regulate edibles. and really influencing the regulation of edibles in a powerful way. And so looking between what's true in maybe different provinces or what some of the states that have created legalization, there's so many wheels already out there that informing ourselves on what's true with edible regulation in California, in Colorado, in Massachusetts, in Ohio, etc., can give you a lot of good information about how to influence your provincial government and, of course, federally as well. All right, keep those questions coming in. So Payal, we see your question about looking for a good all-encompassing resource to find recent cannabis studies and research. Let me see if Greg and Yvette have some thoughts on that. If not, it sounds like a great way to create a new business where all the hottest research is living.
That's a great question. I don't have an immediate all-encompassing resource. One I will often refer people to, many of them being physicians, is the Doctors for Cannabis regulation. Their website, which is dfcr.org, or you can just Google Doctors for Cannabis regulation, has some really great FAQs with a lot of backed up studies, but it's not all encompassing. So I'd love to hear if Yvette or someone over at NCIA has any other ideas.
Greg, I was going to say good old Google. That's one of your best friends for going in there and just start plugging stuff in. And if there are organizations out there, they're going to pop up. The Times Magazine for this month just put out a great magazine that deals with medicinal, as they call it, marijuana. And it's on their cover. And that whole issue is dedicated to medical cannabis. So, looking at magazines like that, they're going to give references. Just do as much research through Google as you can and attend conferences if you find out that they're dedicated to medicinal use. And there are some, I know in the Southern California area, we have conferences here where it's dedicated to medical science.
Sure, and this is Michelle. I have a couple of good resources. I don't know that they are necessarily completely comprehensive and all-encompassing, but I think a good start. I completely agree with you that Google is always your friend, as we know. Another great resource to check out, many of you may subscribe to a newsletter called Marijuana Moment. They also have a website. It's marijuanamoment.net, and on that website, they have a tab called Science and Health, where they have a lot of really, really great stories, including a lot of studies and research that's going on out there about cannabis. Right now I have it open, and the most recent one says marijuana legalization not linked to increased traffic deaths, study finds. There's another one about dogs being treated with cannabis oil experience less frequent seizures. So I think that that's a really great resource. And I also saw someone else here point out a really good resource that they said, Tina said, if you want the marijuana regulations in all the same place, Canna is a great subscription to have. And we couldn't agree more, which is why if you go to our website and you go to the News and Resources tab, you can go down to our state policy map. And if you're an NCIA member, you can just go ahead and click on that map and see a lot of the information about all the different states, what their laws are, what the regulations are. And if you're a member, we actually have a partnership with Canna where you can access that information for free through your membership.
Great. So for cannabis studies and research, there's some good intel. We just typed into marijuanamoment.net. And then for regulations, slightly different than studies and research, Canna and use NCIA's website as a starting place for that as well. Now, Payal, we'll have somebody from the team at NCIA reach out to you about local level associate affiliate links for NCIA in your state. And Catherine's wondering if we feel like there's a ping pong game and there's different state agencies kind of passing you back and forth and you're not really making any headway, not able to get answers, what's the appropriate protocol on how much to push or follow up or, go to someone's boss without creating offense or burning a bridge? Greg, Yvette, how do you get good answers and stay persistent while keeping it all friendly?
Maureen, I would say staying persistent is key. Not offensive, but stay persistent, stay polite, and continue to ask questions. And if you continue to get the same person, there may be someone else that you can go to and ask the questions. But you have to stay persistent, you stay polite, and you talk to as many people as you can until you can find someone who is knowledgeable about what you're asking, and just go from there. Because you got to understand, in this industry, a lot of people coming in really did not know anything about the cannabis industry, and they have been put in positions where they now have to field all of these questions without that knowledge base, and they're learning as well. So keep that in mind, okay, that they're not the experts in this industry, that you may be a lot more knowledgeable than they are, but just be persistent.
Yeah, and Yvette, one of the things that we said earlier, like Michelle mentioned, that anyone we're communicating with probably has 50 things on their plate in which they're making decisions. Now, for us, all things cannabis are a top priority.
Exactly.
Officials, they might have 43 top priorities. And so one of the things to stay persistent while being a great educator is, of course, to tag yourself and follow up every whatever feels right, 5 to 7 days. But on one of those follow-ups, please be a provider of intel. Attach an article, attach a new study, attach a new graph that's relevant to the question that you want. So you are not just asking for things from them, but you are being a contribution as well. Now that really fits with what Richard's wondering: is too much communication with government a bad thing, especially if you're an applicant in a competitive licensing market? So is there a rule of thumb about how much communication?
Hey, Maureen, I just wanted to add one more thing to the last one first as well, which is, if you do feel like you need to go to another office or a higher up and are worried about offending someone, a great way to inoculate against that is to give that person a heads up you're worried about offending. You know, saying, hey, I hope you can understand from my perspective, I've been feeling frustrated about this. I'm sure you're very busy. If I haven't heard back from you by Friday, I plan on reaching out to this office, and I just wanted to give you a heads up. That might spur them to the action you're looking for. And if it doesn't, it might give them the opportunity to explain the situation to that specific up or higher office so that they're a little more aware of the situation. You might be surprised to learn that they might be waiting for that email because it's what they need to spur that office. So you might end up even helping them, not offending them. Now, to answer the question about is too much communication a bad thing, I'd love for Yvette's perspective on this, given her history in government.
I would say yes, yes, and yes. You know, think about yourself, you know, and you're doing something and someone is, I mean, they are rabid. It just won't stop bugging you. Think about how you would feel. And it's the same thing. You know, as Maureen said, they have many things on their plate. And cannabis is not the end all. You know, it's not the be all. So the more you constantly call, you're going to put them off. And they're not going to want to take a call at all. And if you're applying for a license, you can believe these people are not stupid. They know. And if you have made it known that you're applying for a license, they know what time it is, you know, that you're calling probably to get in good rapport and favor with them, hoping that they will have some influence on your license. But most of them don't, and they talk. The one thing I can tell you is that they do talk to one another. And if they see that you have been a jerk or whatever the case may be, your name will be circulated. So yes, limit yourself, limit your calls.
So respectful and educational in our communication as well. And if we pull on what we discussed earlier, it's really taking that holistic approach. Those in-person meetings where you're crossing paths at that new community center opening, you're sharing new studies. And Catherine, thank you. Of course, as a nurse, some recommendation to our earlier question about where to find science to fill in those knowledge gaps. and Catherine's recommending PubMed and Science Direct. And so as you learn what the positions are or what the fears and concerns of those local officials may be, finding studies and resources that are relevant and sharing them with those folks is a really nice way to stay top of mind, in touch, and less needy. But of course, these folks do work for us on the local level. And so do approach, do have friendly conversations, and do be informative as well. So keep those questions coming in. We've got about 8 more minutes to interact with you with questions. And Tafia is mentioning that in the state of Washington, the Department of Health has a consultant program where people can get lots of training on medical cannabis. And so that's really helpful as well. So what else are you curious about, whether you're a novice or a veteran? And novices, you want to get your feet in there and get your voice heard. And veterans, you want to be a powerful influencer on existing regulations. How else may we be of service to you? Other questions you have? Yvette, Greg, are there questions that you often get or stories from the street that you want to make sure people know?
Maureen, I can say a question that I get from people is if you're dealing with a fiery opponent, you know, how do I handle it? I listen. You know, I listen because you find many times that there are commonalities that you have through all of that passion, through all of that fire. There are things in common, and the only way you're going to find out is if you listen. Many times we want to get our point across and we're not listening to the other person. We just want to talk. We want you to hear us, what we have to say, because it's all important. But spend more time listening. My mom used to say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
That's great. And, you know, a question I often get from clients is something around the lines of what local lobbyists do I need to hire, or how do I find my local lobbyists? And often the answer to that is not to try to seek out that person who, you know, plays on the softball team with the mayor, as much as that you need to be out there in the community. And in fact, the best kind of lobbyists, whether you need them or not, once they see you as a community member, are probably going to approach you.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Well, we're so glad that you took time to do this, and that we'll ask you in just a moment, but I'd love to have Greg share kind of a final thought about how we can approach local government in a powerful way.
Thanks, Maureen. So I had a client who went through everything that we just discussed today, unfortunately several times, in search for a host community that he could really interact with. He went to the city council meetings, the local community events. He learned the local laws several times over, did an enormous amount of cannabis education for himself. And one city after the next kept just very much keeping their bans in place, not wanting him and his team in that community. But he persisted and kept up with it. And he went to a meeting, which he thought was just going to be 1 or 2 field reps or somebody like that for a particular community. And when he got there, there was over 24 people that the city had organized to greet him. And they weren't only there to greet him and to hear what he had to say, but they came with gifts and open arms, wanting him to be welcomed into their community. And part of the reason they learned about him and had that enthusiasm is because a couple members of their community actually saw him in other localities connecting with people, shaking hands and getting out there, showing his friendly face. It didn't seem at that time, and he would have had no way of knowing, that he was being seen and heard and noticed, and that the right community was out there for him, that he wanted to be in and they wanted to have him. And he, you know, came back from that meeting with wine and cookies and all sorts of stuff that people said, we saw him over there. He's a professional. He wants to bring cannabis jobs and be a community member. We want him here. What can we do for that? So if you get discouraged in one city or county, Don't necessarily assume it's you. Don't think your strategy has to change. Keep up with it. I think that that's a great story to keep in mind and how long this kind of stuff goes. And next slide, final slide here, is what final thoughts we have. And I think the thing I'd love to leave us all with is to read and reread all of those regulations and ordinances and statutes. It's not fun, but you'll be happy you did it when the question comes. Maureen?
Absolutely. Yvette, do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom?
I would say that keep in mind that this industry, the regulation, legalization, this is a marathon and not a sprint. I know you and we all want to get things done like yesterday, but we want things to be right. We want things to be orderly. So just remember, this is a marathon and not a sprint.
Awesome. Michelle, final thoughts about approaching government?
Sure. My final thoughts are just to remember that change and progress take time. I have a quick story for you guys. Many of you obviously know about the banking issue and how it affects the cannabis industry. And there's been legislation to address that on the Hill for years. And it has taken years of working with members of Congress, with committee chairmen and women and their staff, with our members, to finally reach a tipping point where finally in February, for the first time ever, the banking issue was brought up for a hearing in the House Financial Services Committee. And we were so lucky, NCIA worked with our membership to gather almost 100 personal stories and testimonies of how the banking issue affects our industry, why it needs to be fixed. And we were so proud that during that hearing, Congressman Perlmutter, who's the lead sponsor of the bill, which is the Safe Banking Act, read 3 of those stories aloud. And it was almost an emotional moment for me to know that I'd been working on this issue for years, and that finally, after all those years of meetings and fundraisers and events that I attended and emails and everything, to hear our members' stories read aloud by a member of Congress during a congressional hearing was remarkable. And it's just a really, really important reminder that we have to do a lot of long and hard work behind the scenes, but that again, change takes time.
And this is Maureen. I would say each and every got this. You can do this. Approaching local government doesn't need to be a big mystery or intimidating. Start sharing your stories. Be a powerful influencer. And in the best of worlds, our proponents can be even more vocal in their support. And maybe our vocal opponents can silence themselves a little bit as we begin to share more and more great information. It's our pleasure as the State Regulations Committee, as part of NCIA, to share this wisdom with you, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars as well. Here's to moving the industry forward with integrity, compliance, and professionalism. Thanks so much.